Ladies and gentlemen, coming soon, a podcast you've all been waiting for. The movie podcast to end all movie podcasts. A podcast that discusses and critiques the best of the best and the worst of the worst movies playing at a theater near you. With a host whose opinions have been deemed as fact by your favorite fact checkers. And that's a fact. Without further ado, let me introduce you to the movie maestro, the tyrant of theater, the gumshoe of review, the man that makes theater employees and Hollywood execs shiver by his mere presence. Ladies and gentlemen, the judge, the jury, the sultan of cinema, Justin Henson. Welcome to the Movie Wire.
And welcome to this week's edition of The Movie Wire. I'm your host, Justin Henson, and welcome to the show. Now, this week I planned on having a Scream week, but I just couldn't help but sneak in at least one theatrical release. We do have a big show this week with 3 brand new reviews, with 2 now available to stream, and 1 movie that hits theaters at the end of this month. This week on the show, a Pop-Tart will rise in the Netflix original Unfrosted. From zero to hero comes the story of an applejack salesman who must go against hundreds of adults in beaver costumes in this silent comedy, Hundreds of Beavers. And finally, a special early review of the Garfield movie that releases in theaters everywhere May 24th. We've got a lot to cover this week, so let's jump right in. Ready for my verdict? Let's get into it.
Out of the windows to watch. A roar and a burst of flame. The Movie Wire podcast with just meet people like me.
The podcast for hot and trending movies.
The Wire.
And here we go.
In this 19th century supernatural winter epic, a drunken applejack salesman must go from zero to hero and become North America's greatest fur trapper by defeating hundreds of beavers and hundreds of beavers.
Mike Cheslick, the director of Hundreds of Beavers.
Yes, and I am Ryland Bricks and Cole Twos, and I am the Fallen Star, co-writer and producer of Hundreds of Beavers.
It was 2019. It was right after the premiere of Lake Michigan Monster at the Milwaukee Film Fest. We were at the landmark Lane's Bar in Milwaukee, talking about what our next project should be. And it's hazy at this point. It's been 5 years, but basically we felt that there wasn't enough snow-based slapstick, and someone needed to step forward and revive the dying American genre of snow-based slapstick that so far had only had one entry, the Donald Duck short where they have a snowball fight. It's time for the second and final entry in the snow-based slapstick subgenre.
Yes.
And we've hopefully completed the subgenre.
Some of the early, again, everyone likes silent film. Everyone likes Buster Keaton. Everyone likes Harold Lloyd and Charlie Chaplin. And for some reason, people got it in their minds like, oh, well, of course, you can't make a movie like that anymore. And it's like, well, why not? Everyone likes those movies, So when 100 years ago, we can just let's do it again. And so we found that, people are hungry for this physical comedy, no dialogue, and be able to play around the world. And people have been really latching onto it.
Our DP Quinn Hester is a soldier of cinema, and he survived the 12-week winter shoot without complaining even once. And has brought all these high contrast black and white images from my little storyboards into reality.
Yeah, and it was kind of like we wanted to just meld together all this actual shooting we did in northern Wisconsin, northern Michigan in the woods, and meld that together with green screen elements to make this very cohesive look to the movie. And it's just one of those things where if you can get the audience to buy into this like lo-fi look early on, then you can create very large worlds, and you can get away with doing, 1,500 effect shots in, again, a lo-fi style. And I think people find that endearing, that it looks the way it does. It's one of these movies that it looks very different than anything else coming out. And I think that was sort of one of the ideas of that's going to sort of set us apart from what everyone else is doing. Right when you see the trailer, you're just like, wow, this is like nothing else happening right now.
Now, let me just say, Hundreds of Beavers is one of the most brave and ambitious comedies to be released in current times, and I applaud its ambition. When we look at comedies today, where I have stated numerous times that comedies are so bogged down by what creators can say or do, with writers scared of not telling a joke because it might offend, or studios not wanting to make a movie because it might offend. This has been the downtrend for comedy during the last decade. Whereas from the late 90s to early 2000s, we were met with a new kind of comedy that became almost the new norm. The type of comedy to push the limits, the do anything for a laugh kind of comedy. This is where the baseline has been over the last 20 plus years of creating something that will offend enough to get the viewer to laugh. And I am guilty of falling for that standard that was set in the early 2000s for being introduced as the new standard of comedy. And no, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that type of comedy if it's done well. Some of the most memorable theater-going experiences have come from this type of comedy, even from the bad comedies. And a lot of us have fell in love with these kinds of movies that we got the best energy or the best audience reaction from a joke that really did push the limit. And now we are in current times where we have seen a decrescendo of comedy in the last 10 years. Now that studios are afraid of jokes, writers have been shut down, asked to censor their work, or some screenplays that will never see the light of day, pieces of work that could be the next classic that are shut down from fear. We have seen limited, safe, generic, limited release of comedies that come out to theaters because of this. And when it comes to streaming, we have seen a generic plethora of releases that feel like they have all come from the same assembly line. Now comes Hundreds of Beavers that feels like they recognize my frustrations in the comedy genre lately and turns the script on the evolution of comedy to bring us an attempt at a true reset of this genre, to revitalize the way we look at comedy. But the sad part is that Hundreds of Beavers is only available on streaming, and even on streaming, it's still limited on where you can view it. Hundreds of Beavers doesn't shoot for the shock factor, gross factor, rom-com, subtle humor. It takes a really risky type of comedy that a lot of viewers haven't been subject to, or even experienced. So for some, this movie may feel really fresh, and it will come down with a love or hate it kind of viewer. But for me, I found myself nodding my head in agreement within the first 30 minutes, to all the way to the climax of the last 30 minutes of blowing it kisses. The movie is shot in the tradition of silent comedies of the 1920s, where studios had to be clever on camera angles, clever practical camera effects, and the use of the talents of the actor's physical ability to create a genuine laugh. What Hundreds of Beavers actually does is integrate some subtle current techniques while respecting the old. I was reminded of the 1925 Charlie Chaplin classic, The Gold Rush, in which many charming nods from The Gold Rush can be spotted here. The film offers over-the-top moments that are intentionally meant to be over-the-top that we see mostly prominent in the last act. When I started this film, within the first 30 minutes, I was pondering how they were going to prolong this concept for the entire runtime of almost 2 hours. Most comedies can't even stretch it to 90 minutes. But here, our writers Mike Cheslick and Ryan Bricks and Cole Hughes play it smart and add multiple directions our character Jean Kayak can go. Within the first act, we are introduced to multiple situations that open up a playground of comedy. Now, our main character, Jean Kayak, is actually played by one of our writers, Ryan Bricks and Cole Hughes, who clearly had a vision of this character and how he wanted to attack each and every silent spectacle. Some of his portrayal are overly intentionally cartoonish. Some of these moments make us tilt our heads and ask, how in the hell did they do that? Some are intentionally over-the-top ludicrous that I couldn't help but laugh. And there are some moments that I just sat back and I didn't even want to think. I just wanted to enjoy it for what it was. There was a point when I thought to myself, this movie can't do wrong. It has earned the right to be as ludicrous as it wants. It's put in the work to visually appreciate it and not shake my head at it. Now, love or hate this movie, it doesn't really matter because there will be little to no debate on how good this movie looks and the amount of effort that went into this movie to make it look the way it does. And the shocking factor of it that would put any debate to this to rest is that this is a majority of the filmmakers and the cast's first movie, including our writers, director, and most of the cast. I think that's what blew me away is the fact that most of these filmmakers with little behind their belt can create something that looks appealing like this with a budget of $150,000, and it took 4 years to raise the money to even make a movie like this. Studios should take notes that they have more to lose with big budget movies than smaller budget movies like this. How many of these small movies, these $100,000 budget movies, would it take to match the failure of even some recent Disney flops before hitting it big? And I can guarantee they're going to hit a gold nugget before they actually drain money like they would on some of their box office flops. We have seen a ton of these low-budget Cinderella success stories from a lot of films to justify this strategy. If only these movies can make it to the big screen and have a fighting chance. Because when we look at reboots, sequels, franchises, it's not the franchises that make money, it's the filmmakers and creators. This is a prime and great example of a bunch of filmmakers that, given their creative use of a budget and clear vision, these creators will make me more excited to see their names pop up in a new movie than any of the newer reboots, franchises, or sequels that come into theaters. Now, there is enough in Hundreds of Beavers that kept me engaged into what was going to happen next. From watching our main character, Jean Kayak, go from stranded to working his way up through survival in the wilderness, to learning how to trap, falling in love, to going against the army of clever beavers, in which the climax goes completely bonkers. But it just works because these filmmakers know their abilities and know they have earned the right to ensure its ridiculousness. Hundreds of Beavers is a low-budget achievement in not only filmmaking, but comedy. So low budget that I can picture these filmmakers casting people from the last furry convention to wear the beaver costumes. It makes the classic silent comedies relevant again by not copying the material, but making it current by tailoring it to viewers' current experience with comedy and how we laugh in a current society today. It really adjusts to the type of viewer it wants to bring in. If there was any movie that defined a genre cinematic reset, I would love to say that this is it, but sadly, this was limited release and it won't be. But this is a mere seed of inspiration for filmmakers and writers to grow upon. Hundreds of Beavers is streaming on Fandor for free with subscription or a free trial, and it's also available to rent or buy on Amazon Prime. It's a silly movie with actual smarts behind the filmmaking, and it's truly one not to miss. I'm giving Hundreds of Beavers 3.5 stars.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby.
Now, before we get into the rest of the show, make sure you check out my reviews for movies that just became available to rent, buy, or stream now.
Now available on video cassette.
The Ghostbusters are back to face a chilling threat in Ghostbusters Frozen Empire that put a freeze on all the charm to receive 2 stars. Children can be such monsters in a wildly entertaining and fresh take on a vampire film that involves a vampire in a tutu in Abigail that received 3.5 stars. Election season is a bloodbath and change is here for a movie that I forgot even got released to theaters in this horror movie that won't be getting my vote in Founders Day that received 1.5 stars. Revenge gets ripped and love lies bleeding, which made me drink a pre-workout drink with no intention of working out to pump out 3.5 stars. One small ember can burn down everything in Monkey Man, which made me go bananas, receiving 3.5 stars. An unexpected encounter, an unlikely bond, an unforgettable adventure with a man and his dog story in Arthur the King, which made me roll over with emotion, receiving 3 stars. All right, no more animal jokes. Long Live the Fighters in June Part 2 that kept me in the theater for almost 4 hours until I gave it 3 stars. And finally, Sydney Sweeney goes from a good comedy and a bikini in Anyone But You to a bad thriller in a nun uniform in Immaculate that really needed a director to exercise it, receiving 1.5 stars. You can check out those reviews on previous episodes, and while you do, don't forget to follow, subscribe, and review. Now, before we get into the rest of the show, make sure you check out this week's episode of the Cultworthy Cinema Podcast and the Movie Wire's new crossover show, Back to the Balcony, where this week we cover the Siskel and Eberts Best of 1986. This is the first Best of show, and this is one you don't want to miss. And speaking of Back to the Balcony, make sure you check out my cinema partner in crime, Antonio, over at the Cultworthy Cinema Podcast. Each week he covers cinema gems that deserve a discovery or rediscovery. If you're looking for some good conversation or a recommendation on a movie to watch, this is your show. But let's hear from Antonio over the Cultworthy Cinema Podcast now.
The Cultworthy Podcast. Join me, Antonio Palacios, each week as I guide you through a never-ending sea of obscure cinema and cult-worthy gems that deserve a rediscovery. Find me on all listening platforms and at thecultworthy.com. The Cultworthy Podcast. Join us.
In 1963 Michigan, business rival Kellogg and Post compete to create a pastry that could change breakfast forever in the Jerry Seinfeld Netflix original, Unfrosted.
Ground control, we are go for launch. T-minus 3, 2, 1, lift off.
I believe we have split the atom of breakfast. In the early 1960s, the American morning was defined by milk and cereal. And the two undisputed giants of the cereal world were Kellogg's and Post.
Major news from the breakfast world. The Post Cereal Company has reportedly invented a shelf-stable fruit pastry breakfast product.
No.
Yeah.
Boy.
It's Post. They did it.
I'm about to finally crush that big red K that never stops glaring at me. How do you think Post did it?
There's always a surprise inside the box.
I wonder if they use xanthan gum.
Xanthan.
Kellogg's is entering the race to reinvent breakfast with the help of Steve Schwinn, Chef Boyardee, and Jack LaLanne.
They're stacking the deck with ringers.
Hey, you know Isaiah Lamb from Quaker?
You Kellogg's people.
We're about to have some very powerful people very upset.
You have to win. Are you making any progress?
It's not to scale, but...
What are you guys, 5 years old? Little John draws better than that. And I think there's something wrong with him.
Nobody said this was gonna be easy.
We're talking about happy childhoods for millions of American kids. The important thing is the name.
Fruit Magoos! What?
No.
Heat 'em up and eat 'em ups.
No sale.
Oblong nibblers.
Is this a joke?
Whoever gets to the shelves first is gonna win this thing.
Give up the tarts, old man!
How did it get this far?
It's breakfast. Things happen.
Isn't this a cereal company? Why did my husband explode?
Unfrosted is absolutely unbearable to watch. In his first movie directorial debut, Jerry Seinfeld brings us a story about the origin of Pop-Tarts. Just not completely true. Actually, the competition between Post and Kellogg on who is going to bring this to the market first is the true part. And the rest of the movie, maybe around 98%, who knows of it, is completely false. And I wish I could call this a comedy farce, but it's really not that funny at all. Unfrosted is packed full of actors and comedians that I'm sure just took the project to be alongside Jerry's first directorial debut, and maybe to network with other comedians. There is not one scene we can go without seeing a familiar face, including Max Greenfield, Amy Schumer, Patrick Warburton, Rachel Harris, Melissa McCarthy, Jack McBrayer, James Marsden, Peter Dinklage, Bill Burr, Fred Armisen, and of course, Hugh Grant as Tony the Tiger, along with Christian Slater as a mysterious milkman. This is the comedic cast of dreams, which after watching the movie, I saw an interview done with Jerry Seinfeld by Matt Friend on the red carpet of the premiere of Unfrosted, and Matt went on to say he felt like this premiere is like the designated survivor of comedians, with a danger of them being all in one building. He's right, because this cast is so jam-packed full of comedians wanting to participate, almost like high-name actors wanted to be stormtroopers in a Star Wars movie. They just want to be there. But this is the biggest fault of the movie, where Seinfeld isn't an experienced director, and boy does it show. And the cast just seems to follow either A, the direction, and they don't want to question the direction by Seinfeld, or B, they're just going to keep their mouth shut because a Seinfeld-directed comedy about Pop-Tarts is too good to rock any boat. The film consistently feels way too safe. We have Unfrosted present a lot of situational funny concepts, but the cast feels as safe as acting in a G-rated SpongeBob movie, where ludicrous things happen, but the recognizable cast just feel their presence is enough, as if they're just there to be a cameo next to Seinfeld. Unfrosted was written by Jerry Seinfeld himself, B-Movie and Seinfeld TV show writers Spike Fursten and Andy Rubin, who all seem to have just as much success here as in B-Movie when it comes to entertainment, heart, and humor. It's lifeless comedic garbage that feels like an inside joke that they're not sharing with the viewer. Now, many have said that the old 90s Jerry Seinfeld comedy was his peak. This is where his comedy landed, with a lot of credit to Larry David, who's responsible for writing 172 episodes of Seinfeld. Now that Jerry Seinfeld is on his own, part writer and all director, Unfrosted consistently teases at a starting point for something funny that's about to happen and ends up going either nowhere or attempts to tell a joke that just isn't funny, that leads for an awkward chuckle that I've become an expert at for when my kids attempt to tell a joke just to make them feel good. but I had no need to give an awkward sympathy chuckle to this movie. Now, we have seen a lot of these power brand movies over the last few years, and it's almost been a crescendo of crappiness, where studios think we want to see more of a silly farce from these movies, from the Nintendo game Tetris, Nike, BlackBerry, Gran Turismo, Cheetos, Beanie Bubble, and now Unfrosted. This trend started with the three movies that I just mentioned, ending up on my top best movies of the year during their release, to slowly becoming forgettable to now, which is Unfrosted, to one of the worst movies of the year. As these movies come out, they get worse and worse, and they try to force the comedy, and it ends up being completely unfunny and uninteresting. Even more so with Unfrosted. This film is so poorly executed by a director who also helped write it. This is what we call an overconfidence of its director. Seinfeld's directorial style is so cartoonish and overly confident, even when we get to the look and the feel of the time period, it comes across as a mere sitcom. There is no strategic rhyme or reason how anything is shot. For the love of God, Hugh Grant is playing Tony the fucking Tiger, and our filmmakers can't even make that funny. But in fairness, Hugh Grant's mere presence in a Tony the Tiger outfit is humorous, but it's only humorous for the first 5 minutes, and again, the movie does nothing more with it that makes it funny. The only funny thing that came out of Unfrosted is comedian Kyle Dunnigan, who plays Walter Cronkite and Johnny Carson flawlessly. I can see a movie just watching Dunnigan play these two characters. Now, that's an idea, but let's just keep Jerry Seinfeld completely away from it. Unfrosted's big miss is thinking it's above itself by not completely becoming a silly slapstick farce. It stays just below the line of becoming too silly. It banks on the silly situations, but refuses to allow these characters to come to the situations and play in the pure silliness. It's like watching a circus from the outside of the tent. We can tell there's some fun happening in there, but we're not allowed to see it. The writing, we can sense Seinfeld's older, out-of-practice hands, where even during the writing process as a viewer, I can visibly see every time our writers get stuck on where to go with these characters and with the story. I don't know if this was a movie that Kellogg thought they were going to get to really push those Pop-Tart sales, but for me, instead of running to the store craving that delicious breakfast treat, I went to the kitchen, opened up the pantry, and poured dry rice in my mouth, because the movie made me crave something dry, unpleasant, and hard to chew. Unfrosted with so much comedic talent should have been as sinfully delicious as putting butter on a frosted Pop-Tart, but comes across as its title, Unfrosted, and absolutely unbearable, with a lingering feeling it needs to be dipped into something just to digest it. I'm giving Unfrosted 1 star. After Garfield's unexpected reunion with his long-lost father, Reagan Alley Cat Vic, he and his canine friend Odie are forced from their perfectly pampered lives to join Vic on a risky heist in this early review of the Garfield Movie, which releases in theaters everywhere May 24th.
Wait here, Junior. I'll be right back.
You hungry, little guy?
One familia style lasagna to go.
I'm gonna name you Garfield.
Let's get it.
Good morning.
You deserve to be seen with somebody as fly as me.
We're gonna need the big scale.
Does she need to announce it to the whole office?
Say when.
Never, John. Bury me in cheese. Life here is pretty near perfect. Little did I know, it was all about to collapse. Odie, I'm dreaming again. Slap me across the face. I think this is a case of mistaken identity. You must be looking for another gorgeous, lovable kitty cat. Big bag hunter with the she got a big bad drop it. Come on, Junior. You. Huh? This is Vic, my father.
Welcome back, Victor.
Listen, I need your help.
Get them!
I haven't seen you for years, and when I do, you're on the run from a deranged cat. We need to toughen you up. Hey, I know tough, Vic. You've obviously never been in an Olive Garden that's run out of breadsticks. Follow my lead. Oh, cheddar. Probably one of my top 26 favorite cheeses.
My orange tabby and my dog are both missing.
Your call is very important. There are
1,046
people ahead of you.
Drop them now!
We have to go save my dad.
Oh, that cat's a goner.
You think you can battle these villains on your own?
If I don't make it back, tell my story.
Part of me wants to help him.
No, this is how he learns.
No, please, no. Ow, it's so hot. Ow, it's really hurting. Ow, ow, ow.
You saw nothing.
Now, the Garfield movie is releasing just 2 weeks before its 20-year anniversary of the 2004 live-action film that Bill Murray took the form-fitting voice of our lasagna-loving cat. Murray seemed to fit just perfectly into that character, and that was really the only thing going for it. But as I watched the 2024 animated adaptation, there are times I felt appreciative of the elements of the 2004 version. Not necessarily the execution of it, but rather the ideas of it. This 2024 version takes Chris Pratt, who is now voicing our orange tabby cat, and who is also really starting to annoy me with how many animated movies he's in. And it's not so much that he's in a lot of animated movies, but rather he is being used as we see Aquafina in animated movies. And where the annoyance lies is that the voice doesn't always match the character. And our filmmakers or Chris Pratt doesn't change a thing about the voice to match the character. Or what they do is just tweak it ever so little or ever so slightly to show an attempt at matching the character while ensuring that everybody knows, hey, this is Chris Pratt's voice. The annoyance here is a mere display of laziness and banking on the name that looks good in the marketing in hopes to drive this movie. But as I watched the Garfield movie, I did find myself getting bored with our main character, and that's a problem, especially in an animated movie when the main character bores you, especially a well-known character like Garfield. It feels like Chris Pratt is merely just delivering lines with no understanding of the character, or treating it like it's just another animated gig that ends with a paycheck. Even Bill Murray, who didn't even want to do the original Garfield movie, had some character understanding. Maybe his distaste for being in Garfield shined over to the character, but at the end of the day, the voiceover worked. Now, animated voices aside, what made me appreciate the ideas from the original movie the most was the time spent with John. Even though the performances were uninspired, but at least the attempt of creating a relationship was there. Even from the first Garfield comic strip in 1978, the focal point of the likability of the strip wasn't just Garfield, but the interactions from all the other characters as well. The first 30 minutes of the Garfield movie kicks us off with the origin of John meeting Garfield, and then the introduction to Odie. And not only is it a sweet introduction, a sweet origin story, but it feels like the comic strip if we made it in current times. At about the 20-minute mark, I thought to myself, finally an animated movie that stays true to the source material and builds upon that. Builds up the relationship that will make kids giggle, but also have the adults tilt their heads in nostalgic glee and breathing the words of a sweet, "oh." I had a smile ear to ear with what our writers Paul A. Kaplan, Mark Togrove, and David Reynolds started the first act of what I hoped would continue to be a movie to build upon the antics of our character and our relationships. But with writer David Reynolds being the only experienced animated writer on this writing team with such movies as The Emperor's New Groove and Finding Nemo, if I were to assume with David Reynolds, I would assume that he would be responsible for the first 30 minutes because we get the sweetness from his writing that we've seen in previous movies, and the direction that captures the sweetness of our characters in the first 30 minutes is also spot on. The Garfield movie was directed by Mark Dindal, director of The Emperor's New Groove, Chicken Little, and the 1997 underrated animated feature, Cats Don't Dance. Dindal does a fantastic job on creating an intimate vision of chemistry in the limited time to build these characters, and I'm referring again to the first 30 minutes. But in fairness, we do get a couple moments throughout the movie that it does shine in his heart. We do see that in his direction that I do appreciate that we see in his previous directed movies. After the 30-minute mark, after said and done, we get this great feeling. We're feeling good. This might be something different that everybody can enjoy. I'm feeling confident in this movie. Then something happens to transition the Garfield movie that felt like a light switch. It felt abrupt, like it didn't belong, where we see Garfield and Odie kidnapped by a cliche set of villains. A big dog named Roland, voiced by Ted Lasso's Brett Goldstein, and a little dog, Nolan, voiced by Bowen Yang. And of course, we have to take the little character and make him appear weak, crazy, or stupid. This kidnapping brings Garfield to a reunion with his father, who Garfield thought abandoned him as a kitten, where they are forced to work together to complete a heist for a vengeful kitty named Marge, voiced by Cicely Strong. Once this kidnapping happens and we are introduced to Garfield's father, Vic, voiced by Samuel L. Jackson, the movie goes into complete an animated cliche caper story that seems to drag its feet as Garfield getting out of bed on Mondays. There is absolutely nothing interesting that happens during the middle except when we see an attempt of a rekindling of the father-son relationship, which in honesty is a sweet one, and that's where we see our director's style shine, is putting in the heart to this type of movie. But without the heart, the movie, just like our Chris Pratt character, seems to forget what it is, which is a lazy orange tabby cat who we see more as an action star this go around, with an occasional fat joke thrown in that ends up making no sense, since Garfield during most of the middle is continuously active and jumping around. Why is this fat cat so active in half of the movie? From the first 30 minutes to the ending, and some aspects in the middle, if this movie teaches us anything, is that every single good and strong scene of this movie surrounds our characters when they get rid of this stupid heist plot and focus on the banter between all the characters and focus on the heart. The first 30 minutes to even the last 10 minutes has a perfect balance of heart, humor, and had enough to keep the kiddos entertained. Now, movies like this, especially ones based on the character that was created 48 years ago, I kind of have to take into consideration of who this movie was made for. Was it made for the adults from the 70s and 80s that grew up with the Garfield being a prominent character in pop culture? The answer is no. This was meant for a mix of both parents to enjoy with their kids. The movie has to balance to satisfy both audience members. This thought and reminder ran through my head as I was watching the climax of the Garfield movie, which is the best example of tying generations of Garfield fans together, which involve an army of drones to the Top Gun theme song. Now, this is a climax that won't really challenge the minds of kids, but it's a climax that really brings Garfield into the current age for kids to engage with this character using technology, but also giving parents some fun factor to have them nod during the nostalgic Top Gun music playing in the background. Now, I can review this movie, shake my fist at it, and say, that's not Garfield. But there's a level of appreciation I have for this movie to at least attempt to bring fans from all generations to enjoy it. When this movie attempts heart, it feels warm and it brings a smile to faces. When it wants to focus on ensuring the younger generation feels this character memorable, this is where it's going to be different for every type of kid. But I will say during the middle of the movie, it does become forgettable because we just get the same old cliches, the same old characters that these kids and adults, I should say, have seen over and over again. And I can tell that kids were getting restless during the middle because there's not a lot that happens. There's not a lot of interesting things for kids to really enjoy. And I should say even for adults as well. But I will say this, right when technology gets placed in Garfield's hands, I saw young audience members perk up in their seats. Whether that's for the cool tech or for Garfield, I would hope it would be for Garfield, but I'm a little bit more realistic than that, and that is a shame. The Garfield movie gives us a hint of what it could have been in the first 30 minutes, but it gets lost in itself to show us characters, situations, and cliche generic writing that will make it forgettable over time. As soon as we get past the first act, I felt myself lost in the middle, resting my head in my hand, wondering what happened. But if I am, again, to be fair, there is enough here to make it a fun family outing to keep the kiddos entertained and adults halfway entertained, but not enough for a full recommendation from me. The Garfield movie starts on a high note, it ends on a high note. Here's my recommendation if you go to this movie in the theater. If you want to buy popcorn for the family, wait until the middle of the film where you won't miss anything. Where pouring butter on your popcorn will bring you more entertainment and more excitement. I'm giving the Garfield movie 2.5 stars. And that's a cut on this week's edition of The Movie Wire. I want to thank you for listening and thank you for your support. You can also show support by following me on Instagram, Blue Sky, X, Thread, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, and Letterboxd at Movie Wire Show. And please don't forget to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And if you haven't yet, make sure you check out the Cultworthy Cinema Podcast and the Movie Wire's new show, Back to the Balcony. Again, the link to that show will be in the description of this episode. Until next week, do me a favor. Make sure you stay for after the credits to show the respect to those that put their blood, sweat, and tears into making a feature film and support your local movie theaters.
A verdict has been made on this episode of The Movie Wire by your host, Justin Henson. He thanks you for listening to the show. You can follow Justin on Instagram and Twitter at Movie Wire Show or visit his website, www.themoviewire.com. Oh, and don't forget to leave a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. I'm sure he'd love to hear from you. Until next time, we will see you at the movies.
Thank you for bringing me to the movies.